It is a cliche to say that this guest needs no introduction, but if you haven't heard of Paul Stamets by now, you're probably at the wrong conference. Self-trained mycologist, speaker, author, medical researcher, and entrepreneur, Paul has done much to inoculate the public consciousness with psychedelic mycelium. One of Paul's books actually inspired me to start growing mushrooms 10 years ago, so thank you very much, Paul. Here today to present Psilocybin Mushrooms, Bridges, Cultures, and Continents, a Worldwide Reawakening. Part man, part mushroom. Please welcome to the stage, Paul Stamets.
Good morning, people. Thank you, Sarah and Silja, for putting on this conference, and I'm so honored to be with all of you today. And I would like to reflect on the fact that we are all here due to something that artificial intelligence will never be able to capture, in my opinion, and that is random acts of kindness. My life is defined by that. My success is defined by that. Of individuals who've come into my life with no expectation of a transactional return on their random act of kindness, just because they believed in what I was doing and the philosophy I was pursuing, the discoveries what we were co-discovering. And think about that. Let's go back generations in time. It could have been your great-great-great-grandmother and great-great-grandfather. It could have been one person took a left, one person took a right, one person fell down, a helping hand reached to help that person get up. It is these gestures of random acts of kindness that really have brought us here today. I believe matter begets life. Life becomes single cells become strings. Strings fork, they become networks. And networks are the basis of the reality that we share. I believe these networks exist throughout the universe. The organization of our neurons, of the mycelium, of the Earth's internet, organization of dark matter and dark energy, they all follow this string theory. And these networks are collaborative, they're resilient, they're adaptive to change, they build guilds of other cooperating organisms so the community can survive for the benefit of its descendants. I believe that we'll find fungi throughout the universe. We are descendants of fungi. 650 million years ago, fungi gave birth to animals. I believe we'll find psilocybin and tryptamine molecules throughout the universe. I believe we'll find sentient organisms. And psilocybin and these tryptamines are consciousness molecules. All of us who are experienced in psychedelics know that we're sharing right now a very thin slice of reality. And they give us the opportunity to tap into universal consciousness, to have a sense of being. Our being here today, I believe, is a continuation of not only our ancestry, but throughout the universe, throughout the multiverse. Conferences like this of sharing knowledge on psychedelics are continuing and have continued and will continue. Not only in this universe, in the multiverse, I believe there's intelligent beings, not only throughout the universe. I have a keen sense that we're being visited now by intelligent beings from across the cosmos. Perhaps they're sitting in this audience today. But we are a continuum of knowledge keepers, passing knowledge down to our descendants, honoring our ancestors, and hearing the urgent need of now at a time critical when we face such important decisions. I believe that psychedelics stimulate random acts of kindness. And it's so important that we shepherd this knowledge, we share it. So I'm going to take you on my life's journey and that of others. I'm honored to be a knowledge keeper and a voice in this time. Alex Gray portrayed this very well. Glossolalia and the stimulation of language from psilocybin, of our primate ancestors, some of the heroic figures in history, and then our friend Autumn Skye did this portrait for my partner, Dr. Pam, and I, showing the expression and the deep love of fungi. I want to first honor Maria Sabina, who never called herself a shaman. She was a knowledge keeper, a sabia. And then Tina Wasson, R. Gordon Wasson's wife. She was a Russian physician. She died in 1958, but she was a mycologist as well. And I propose to you that Maria Sabina was a mycologist. She didn't just buy capsules or buy mushrooms. She went out into the wilds, into the forests and the fields, identified psilocybin mushrooms, knew the differences between those which are psilocybin active and those who are not. And I want to acknowledge my personal mentors, Dr. Michael Bugh, who's still alive, Kit Skates, Daniel Stuntz, and Alexander Smith. 4 days ago, I got my new book in. And this book is dedicated to these three giant women, Maria Sabina, Tina Wasson, and Kit Skates. Women have not been fully recognized, in my opinion and many people's opinion, for the essential roles that they have played in opening up the doors that have led consequentially to thousands of us following this path. I want to honor my father, my brother John, who first introduced me to psilocybin mushrooms, and my mother, all who have passed on. My brother John went to Yale. He brought back this book, Altered States of Consciousness, when I was 14 years of age. I voraciously read it. Some of you know the story. I gave it to my best friend Ryan. Ryan's father found it, burned it, burned my brother's book. Not a happy brother after that. And this stimulated my interest. And John's stories of being in Mexico and Colombia, taking psilocybin mushrooms, I was just adored my older brother. I so miss my brother. This is me when I was 19, 20 years of age. I went through puberty very early, by the way. My first attempt at growing Psilocybe cubensis, which was a failure. And then in 1979, 1977, I met Gaston Guzman, and we went on a mushroom foray for 2 weeks from Northern California to British Columbia, finding psilocybin mushrooms and populating his monograph on the genus Psilocybe. So 47 years ago, 1978, I published my first book when I was 23 years of age on the identification of psilocybin mushrooms. At the Evergreen State College, Dr. Michael Bugh and I received a DEA license, and so I was legally able to possess and cultivate psilocybin mushrooms. I adopted the mantra because I would no doubt was approached by DEA agents. Nature provides, I don't. But nature's so rich in providing. So my new book will not be publicly available until June 10th. I'm very proud of this book. I sought to write this book to build bridges across continents and cultures and to really sort of show a path for bringing people together in this celebration of these unique organisms that are all over our planet. This is well known by many of you, David Nutt's comparison of the toxicity and adverse reactions to different drugs. And psilocybin mushrooms are on the far end of low toxicity. And in fact, magic mushrooms are the most popular of psychedelic drugs. 8 million Americans in a RAND poll admitted, I mean, how many people did not admit? 8 million people admitted to using psilocybin mushrooms in the past year. This is a revolution, folks. It's sweeping the planet, not just the United States. Tens, hundreds of millions of people are seeking out these mushrooms and having an experience that leads to an epiphany that changes their lives. 220 clinical trials are registered at clinicaltrials.gov. Think of that. 220 clinical trials are exploring the diverse impacts that psilocybin has. And yet the vast majority of these, 99%, are with a synthetic molecule, not in the mushrooms, but 99% of the use in the world is with psilocybin mushrooms. There's a giant disconnect between psilocybin, the molecules that are used in medicine, versus psilocybin, the mushrooms that are used by the people. This is a chasm that needs to be bridged. And yet clinical trials face a particularly difficult situation, especially with psychedelics and psilocybin in particular. And I can't sum it up better than Paul Knopf's cartoon here on the futility of a double-blind, placebo-controlled experiment. The placebo double-blind, quote-unquote, gold standard, which it is not, needs to be reconsidered. The positive impacts of psilocybin are unambiguous. Now, it's important to note that psilocybin have positive impacts for everybody. On average, 70% of people have a positive experience, 30% do not. Well, that's an extraordinary success rate when you think about the impact. So where do we find psilocybin mushrooms? Well, in fact, we found them all over the world, including here in Iceland, the only continent not yet to have been discovered to have psilocybin mushrooms in Antarctica. But that's soon to come, I'm sure. So think about the history of the evolution of our species versus the evolution of psilocybin. Genomic analysis recently by Bryn Dendinger, Alex Bradshaw, and his colleagues at Utah State, which I'm happy to say that we funded, did molecular clock data and discovered that psilocybin arose in the fungal genome 65 million years ago. What an interesting date. And the evolution of psilocybin then went through horizontal gene transfer, several other divergence. And so psilocybin mushrooms occur all over the world. From 1800 to 2022, there are over 5,682 collections in herbaria, about 217 known psilocybin mushrooms. And the knowledge of these psilocybin mushrooms follow the colonization of humans from Africa to Europe and throughout the entire world. With ancient traditions, we carry the knowledge. You meet somebody on the path, their friend or foe, far better to befriend. Being a foe, getting an infection, getting in a fight, and dying, that was not a good cost-benefit ratio. Being a friend, though, was. And what do? You share knowledge. You do an exchange, a cultural exchange, and that cultural exchange continues. So going back into the historical record, where have psilocybin mushrooms been found? Now, we come to a concept of what's called, quote-unquote, prehistory. Prehistory means literally before the written word. So we do have histories, putatively, of psilocybin mushroom use prior to written word. In Mesoamerica, we do have very good authentication that ironically came from Catholic priests, with Cortez and the conquistadors who kept records of indigenous use of psilocybin mushrooms. In Europe, there was a successful suppression of indigenous knowledge. But we do have echoes in the archaeological record. We have the Tsitsili cave art in northern Africa associated with the aurochs, with the Bos Taurus, the ancestor of the current cows. And a few feet away from these pictographs that show the bee man with mushrooms and mushrooms preserved in honey would help preserve them, that we find the auroch. This is in northern Africa, the Niger Plateau in currently Algeria. Just to the north, we have the Bos auroch again, and we have mushrooms. Thought to be Psilocybin hispanica, and this was published a few years ago. The association of cattle and mushrooms is strong. Psilocybin hispanica is prevalent currently in Spain. It grows in pastures. We go into Greek culture, and many of you know about the Eleusinian mysteries, and here is Demeter giving Persephone a mushroom before she goes into the underworld at the advent of the seasons in Greek mythology. And then Dr. Pam and I went to Egypt last year. We visited 10 temples. At every single temple, other people went with tour guides to be given the tourists sort of education. Pam and I went mushroom hunting. At every single temple, we found reliefs of mushrooms. Now, this was also the great Baba Kalindi also noted that in his ancestry in Africa, psilocybin mushrooms were likely used. And the psilocybin mushrooms likely used were related to Psilocybe cubensis. Psilocybe cubensis grows in Africa, and the Nile River area basin was rich. It was called the breadbasket of the world before climate change. Now, because of desertification, it's extremely arid. And the mushrooms that may have been used by the Egyptians, Psilocybe cubensis, or a new species just published, Psilocybe ochracea centrata, that looks just like Psilocybe cubensis. We don't know exactly what species the Egyptians would have used, but that we do know because of the Nile River, because of the cattle, and because on these temples and the goddess Hathor, the goddess of the cow, and the Dendera temple, now in the most arid regions of the world, less than 1 millimeter of rain per year. Can you imagine? But it used to be a luxurious delta. And the association of these mushrooms with the blue lily, the blue lotus, is notable. So Dr. Abdimadul first published on this. We found these reliefs when we were there. And when you look at the shape of the vessel here and the shape of the mushrooms, cultivators can do this today. This is a technology that existed back then. You can grab cow patties, stick them into a vase, add water, and the mushrooms will come out of the portals. Moreover, they're phenotypically correct. And so where would cattle go to drink? Ponds. Where does the blue lotus grow? In ponds. Why is blue and gold considered to be sacred colors for the Egyptians? It's interesting that the blue lotus now is being incorporated with Psilocybe cubensis. And even though the threads of time may have been cut due to desertification, cultural oppression, invasion, disease, religion, etc., more than one thing can be true. There's an effort all over the world called re-indigenization, with indigenous people who have echoes, maybe genetic memories of their ancestors using these substances, who are rediscovering, re-implementing that which is resident. So in Egypt, we met alchemists, young alchemists, 20 or 30 of them in the underground, making blue lotus extracts with Psilocybe cubensis and making these potent extracts. And they believe that this is something that's been repeated from their ancestors, even though those threads may have been cut. These images, from a mycologist's point of view, reflect taxonomic accuracy. We found dozens of these across the temples of Egypt, all along the Nile. A noted Egyptologist looked at these and said, "No, you fool, these are not mushrooms, these are shovels." Shovels will be upside down, dude. Moreover, this nippled mushroom figure here is also phenotypically correct. But it shows you that if you're not experienced and have the wisdom of the environment in the context of when these were made, you lose that perspective. So the naivete of scientists refusing to recognize that which is obvious to us is remarkable. And I do admit, those of us who are microcentric can see mushrooms everywhere we look, but that's how we find them, you know. So the mushrooms are golden, they turn blue, two sacred colors. And then in northern India, at Lakshmana temple, where the Kama Sutra images are, there are clearly phenotypically correct images of Psilocybin cubensis that currently grow all around the temple in the poop of cows. And you have to wonder, why are cows sacred? The mother that gives rise to these sacraments, you don't want to hurt the mother. And then outside of Stonehenge, 900 years ago, these hearths were discovered. And these are taxonomically correct images of Psilocybe semelanciata. We go to the Rosslyn Temple, which I visited in Scotland years ago. We found more than 100 images of green man and green woman, and less than 10 of Christ. And I found this one image, no one else has ever published this before, but spending a whole day there looking at hundreds of green man and green woman images, I found this one where the mushrooms speak. They're coming out of the mouth. They're also cuspidate, and they're phenotypically accurate. Those who are not mycologically educated cannot see that which is obvious to those who are. And so we go to Mesoamerica, and now we do have well-documented history. It is not prehistory. It's documented in the use of psilocybin mushrooms. They're the Mayan mushroom stones, predominantly in Guatemala, which is open to interpretation. It could be invoking rain, and they were very dependent upon rainfall for fresh water. It could be family, like coat of arms, family heritage. It could be boundary markers. We don't know. They stopped making the mushroom stones at about 500 AD or BCE. But interestingly, in the 1500s, the priest Sahugun that came over the Cortez recorded the use of psilocybin mushrooms by the indigenous people. They ate them before dawn with honey. They also drank cacao before dawn. They began to dance, and some sang and some wept. Some cared not to sing, but would sit at dawn in their rooms and stayed there pensive-like. Then when the drunkenness of the mushrooms had passed, they spoke with one another about the visions they had seen. 1529. In Germany, or in Bavaria then, in 1516, the Bavarian Beer Purity Act was passed, specifically banning mushrooms. So Germanic indigenous people likely also would pick these psilocybin mushrooms. They would ferment in honey to create mead, as we think was happening in Africa, as we know is happening all over the world today, as was happening in Mesoamerica. So let's look at some of the species that the indigenous people in Mesoamerica use. Psilocybe zapaticorum, Psilocybe cerulescens, Psilocybe mexicana, which has an interesting side channel in its life cycle, forms sclerotia that are very tough, like potato-like structures. It helps them survive drought. You plant the sclerotia, boing, mushrooms come out of it. So these are the three dominant species that were used in Mesoamerica, and particularly by the Mazatecs. And then R. Gordon Wasson, as many of you know, and Tina Wasson went to Mexico multiple times. But Blas Pablo Rico and Richard Schultes were first given mushrooms in 1939. And then they went to Harvard. My book talks a lot about the history of this. And then the Life magazine article, many of you know. And then Tina Wasson published an article within a few weeks of the Life magazine article in 1957. They ingested the mushrooms in 1955 in June, 1 month before I was born. Somehow I think that's significant. I'm not sure exactly how. But then Psilocybin cubensis was disdained by the indigenous people of Mexico and Guatemala. And in the Aztecs, they were associated with the conquistadors who brought over cattle. So Psilocybin cubensis was not found in the Americas, we think. But interestingly today, my good friend Giovanna Fershi went down to the Mazatec village, to Maria Sabina's hometown, and she was surprised and actually delighted that so much Psilocybin cubensis was being used by indigenous peoples because of seasonality, climate change, and their undependability of getting a supply of psilocybin mushrooms from the wild. The Western in vitro cultivation techniques of San Isidro, of Psilocybin cubensis, enabled indigenous people today to have a ready, available supply for them to continue their traditions. All cultures borrow knowledge from each other. Indigenous traditions are never static. They're constantly evolving and adapting and trying to be able to keep the mission of the psilocybin mushrooms in the spirit, which tells all of us to share. That is the lessons of psilocybin. Terence McKenna, our dear friend who's passed, he wrote a book called Psilocybin Magic Mushroom Growers Guide, by far the most influential book. And the techniques for growing psilocybin mushrooms on grain came from a mycologist by the name of Kneebone from Penn State University, very rarely cited, very difficult article. But he received specimens from Mexico via Rolf Singer, an American mycologist, and he cultivated them because he was part of the mushroom growing research laboratory at Penn State for button mushrooms. So he cultivated them, and to his surprise, they fruited out of grain. Button mushrooms don't do that. So when he published that, Terence and Dennis McKenna, were able to amplify this knowledge from a very erudite source. And the question becomes, well, are psilocybin mushrooms used in the Pacific Northwest of North America? Amanita muscaria is everywhere. It is being used. Lots of mushrooms are used. But Nancy Turner, renowned ethnobotanist, many of you know her. She's written dozens of books, very tight with indigenous people. There's no records of indigenous people in the Pacific Northwest using psilocybin mushrooms. But a caveat, that doesn't mean they didn't use them. That just means there's no records. So if there's not the record keeper, the artist, and if there's an oral tradition, when you think about the shamans within a tribe or the knowledge keepers, the mycological knowledge keepers are a subset. They're so ephemeral. They come and they go in 4 or 5 days. Plants are there for weeks, months, years. Frogs are there for weeks, months, years. Mushrooms are there for a few days, they disappear. What were they? You remember them the next year. Why didn't they come back? Because they're always moving around. These are saprophytes that require new debris fields in order to survive, and they follow human activity. We're the greatest debris field generators in the world. We started doing these conferences, and this is at Silku Station, 1979. Because I had a DA license, you don't recognize me, I'm in the center there. Jonathan Ott, Jeremy Bigwood, Gaston Guzman, Dale Leslie, myself, Jim Jacobson, and Stephen Pollock. Because we had the DEA license, I could hold the psilocybin mushrooms. Younger people here may not fully appreciate how dangerous it was for us to do these conferences, how paranoid we were during the times of Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford and the war on drugs. We sought to create a peace treaty with psilocybin, to elevate psilocybin to its rightful place. And I'm so honored that my colleagues, we did these conferences, of which this conference is a continuation, not only of these conferences, but of the Eleusinian mysteries going back thousands of years. We are now the knowledge keepers. We are carrying these traditions forward. We have a deep responsibility to do this right, to do this to the best. But if you fail, that's okay. Let us not judge each other by one person having a very bad day. That is not the totality of your life. We all will make mistakes. In the time of social media and vilification and people hiding behind screen names, lots of cheap shots are taken. It hurts. But the lesson of psilocybin is to heal, to forgive, to mend fences, build bridges. I was a good friend with Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. I'm a deadhead. So I realized I was in this middle intersection, Venn intersection between the psychedelic scientists and the psychedelic cultural heroes. So we did a conference at Brighton Bush Hot Springs in 1999. 140 people tripped at that conference. I said, that's the last conference I'm organizing. I had to say that because the DEA no doubt was there. So we'll look at Psilocybin cyanescens, a very popular species in the Northwest. But interestingly, it colonized the Europe from the Americas. It was first discovered in the Kew Gardens in London in 1947. And it came from, we believe, rhododendrons that had wood chips that were planted in the Kew Gardens. So that was the inoculation point, that nexus, that then spread Psilocybin cyanescens that then colonized Europe. Psilocybin cubensis came from the Old World to the New World. Psilocybin cyanescens went from the New World to the Old World. It's now been reported, iNaturalist is a great resource. It's a beautiful species. They're called wavy caps. They kind of wave at you. Very easy to naturalize. Grows prolifically. You can do substrate to substrate transfer. So one article that was published in scientific literature said, well, why would mushrooms produce psilocybin? And they said, oh, it's an insecticide. And I thought, that's a weird thing for these scientists to say. So I got a hold of them. I said, have you ever collected Psilocybin cubensis in the tropics? And they said, no. Well, if you had, you know it's full of insect larvae. If psilocybin is an insecticide, it's not a very good one. But we do think it does have unique protective properties that prevents predation. And it's from gastropods. So Dr. Pam and I did this experiment. The garden giant, Stropharia rugosa annulata, is on the right. Psilocybin cyanescens is on the left. We got 10 black slugs. By the way, European black slugs invaded the Americas. We put them in the center. We set up an iPhone camera. Thank you, Dr. Pam. She's the one that really controlled this. So here's a fun little experiment of a choice test between an edible and sometimes choice mushroom, the garden giant, and a potent psilocybin mushroom. So let's see what the slugs prefer. Yeah, let's go over here, exploring. Oh, I like this. I like this. Yeah, let's go over here. Oh, oops, no, I don't want that. Well, let's go over here a little bit more. I'll go over here. This is good. I like. Oh, let's go over here. Nope, don't want that. So, let's eat the garden giant. So think about that. Psilocybe prevent themselves from being parasitized by slugs. Now, these temperate psilocybes, they sporulate very slowly. So having a long duration of sporulation, not being predated upon by snails or slugs, extends the longevity. So I'm honored to have rediscovered or discovered several new species of psilocybes. Psilocybe azurescens, one of the most potent species in the world. Psilocybe wiley, named after Andrew Weil. Psilocybe somnifibulosa. The Psilocybe liniformis variety americana. And 2 years ago, I had a psilocybe species named after me, Psilocybe Stametsii, which it's a huge honor. Now, many physicians in the audience here, you can name, if you find a new disease in medicine, you can name the disease after yourself, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, et cetera. But when it comes to botany and mycology, the faux pas. You never name a species after yourself. That's an honor that's bequeathed to you by other scientists' recognition of your successes. So psilocybe mushrooms typically have purple, brown to black spores, and they bruise bluish. And so there's a rule that I'll give you, a general rule. With guild mushrooms, if they have purple, brown to black spores, and they bruise bluish, almost certain to be a psilocybin mushroom. With the exception of the Stropharia cyanea aeruginosa complex, which is a blue mushroom, grows here in Iceland, not psilocybin active, not poisonous. So, but generally speaking, this is a very good rule to have. You can do a spore print, purple, brown, the mushroom bruised blue, with guild mushrooms, not boletes. Then almost for certain you have a psilocybin mushroom. So a species was found in Quebec. It was named Psilocybe quebecensis. Well, the Aztecs used Psilocybe azotiocorum. Genomic analysis now shows that they're the same. So quebecensis now has become subservient to the priorly published name, Psilocybe azotiocorum. Psilocybe azotiocorum grows in Quebec. Coincident with the psilocybe mushrooms are these deadly poisonous mushrooms that are rusty brown spores and do not bruise bluish, though they can look blackish on the base of the stem. Very important that you understand the difference between black and blue, both in spore color and bruising, and these are deadly poisonous, containing the same alpha aminitins that are present in the deadly amanitas. Here's Psilocybe pelliculosa and a Psilocybe and a Galerina marginata growing side by side. Look how close they are morphologically, just in their shape. The difference is color, so if you're colorblind, this is not a good field for you. Pelliculosa is so named because of a sepal gelatinous pellicle. Also liberty cap, Psilocybe semilanciata, have the same. And they grow around ponds. And this is the mushroom of Iceland. Psilocybe semilanciata is prolific in Iceland, associated with sheep and cattle. It's very high in psilocybin, very low in psilocin, so it tends to be stable, extraordinarily stable. It barely bruises bluish, so that rule doesn't quite apply, but many of you have picked it. You'll know at the very base of the stem that it's in bluish tones. Sometimes in drying, you'll see blue tints. But psilocybin dephosphorylates into psilocin. Psilocin then degrades into indigo-like color molecule, and that's why it's blue in color. But here's an extraordinarily interesting group of psilocybin active mushrooms. These are secotioid psilocybes. And there are 3 species that I show here. The Psilocybin maluchi, recently rediscovered in South Africa and used by the indigenous people in Lesotho. And there's an oral tradition going back generations celebrating this mushroom orally in songs. It's a potent psilocybin mushroom. The other one is Wararoa, the North Island of New Zealand, and a newly found species near Lake Tahoe called, provisionally named, Nome Prove, Psilocybe gandalfiana, named after Gandalf. These species, the spores are not emitted from the gills. They remain closed up. Now, what does this mean? Well, think about it. When you have 2 spores, typically have to come together and mate. If they're compatible, they fuse. Then the mycelium downstream can produce a mushroom. So what would be the advantage of a mushroom that would be closed up like a puffball that they're evolving into, not to release the spores? Well, the indigenous people of South Africa and other people have noticed around the world with these secotioid species in New Zealand, they attract birds. They mimic fruit. And so when the birds peck at this mushroom, spores are engorged in their beaks. Now you don't have 2 spores, due to an entropy, they spread out of the inverse square of distance. You've got a spore packet of hundreds of spores in the beak of a bird that can fly hundreds of miles. What a clever innovation in order to spread the progeny of these species. And flesh becomes gills, becomes spores. The more sporulation you have, the less flesh you have, the less psilocybin. So these remain potently active psilocybin mushrooms. And then many people have discovered this. I discovered it. I found that many other people had also discovered it. Good ideas recommend themselves, is making blue juice. And it's beautiful to make this juice. And the method of making it, a simple method, you take fresh mushrooms, you chop them up, you put them on ice cubes in a tray or in a glass, and then you let the ice cubes melt slowly in the refrigerator. And then you add vodka or some form of ethanol to preserve it. So let's go back and discuss the difference between the molecule versus the mushrooms. What's your preference? To be out in nature, be in contact with the universe? I personally like to do them as the sun is setting, saluting the earth, the cosmos, all indigenous peoples, all my descendants, all our descendants, all those throughout the universe. Or do you want to be in a highly controlled medical hospital? Now, my sister, who's very straight, she's more interested in this subject, but she would never take a magic mushroom. But if a physician prescribed it in a pill with FDA approval, she feels more comfortable. So for her, she's more comfortable in a controlled hospital environment with physicians. The majority of people, and this is why psilocybin mushrooms are not only good, and psilocybin not only good for treating mental and psychiatric illnesses and challenges, but I propose to you, and I think most of us recognize, we're all somewhere on the spectrum, and we move across that spectrum due to events in our life, tragedies, disease, all those things that make life complicated. But a lot of us are in the near normal range of the spectrum. What about prevention of alcoholism, drug use, violence? These things as preventative medicines, treating the disease after the fact, is not as cost beneficial as it is preventing the disease from occurring in the first place. So this is a massive help to our society, socioeconomically. So we published an article comparing case histories of patients who consumed psilocybin, the molecule, versus psilocybin mushrooms, the first one that we know of. And the psilocybin mushrooms are considered more vibrant, less chemically. And moreover, one of the big differences is the long tail at the end of the psilocybin mushroom experience gave time to reflect, to contemplate, to share, to talk, to download. Whereas the psilocybin was up and down very rapidly, also very profound. But when we build community, we build these networks of relationships. Networks of relationships with friends outdoors doing psilocybin, to me, is far more attractive than being in a controlled medical environment. Yet, that is appropriate for many patients. Psilocybin cubensis, as I mentioned, can be easily grown. I innovated a technique here for all your QB growers, as we call you, Psilocybin cubensis growers. Look at that tray. That's one flush. 1/3 of the mass became 1/3 dry weight of mushrooms. This is what's so interesting about psilocybin mushrooms as a psychedelic drug. It's widely available. They're cheaper to grow than portobello mushrooms. It's not something like MDMA or LSD or other psychedelics where you need a laboratory and complex toxic chemicals in order to make it. You can grow this in your kitchen, in your closet. It allows for the universality of use, for the ease of access, and they're not expensive. So psilocybin mushrooms contain, at 1% psilocybin is about 10 milligrams, which is a kind of a liftoff dose. 1/10 of that, 1 milligrams, is considered to be a microdose. Dr. Pan and myself, Zach Walsh, Joey Rootman, and others did a social network-driven survey and on microdosing, and you can see about 88% of the people were taking between 1/10 to 1/3 of a gram. Of those who microdosed, 3,486 people were stacking, and then I came up with this Stamets stack, which I named it after myself because I was so tired of people ripping me off. I mean, it's okay if they acknowledge me, but when they start taking my ideas and calling it their own, I thought, I have a branding problem here. I'm going to go ahead and name this after myself. So it's a combination of niacin, lion's mane mushroom mycelium, and microdosing of psilocybin mushrooms. And this is basically the adapted formula. You're welcome to take a photograph of it if you wish. And the idea of microdosing is, 5 days on, weekends off, or that's the protocol I came up with. The idea is to wash the receptors so they can renormalize. And the other method is the gymphatamine method, which is 1 day on, 2 days off, 1 day on, 2 days off. Both of our methods, believe in the same thing of washing the receptors. Lion's mane mushrooms have been very well authenticated for their neurogenerative properties. And then we got a surprising result, and Dr. Pam and I were not allowed to see the data. Statisticians did this. They had to repeat the data analysis 3 times, and we found something truly amazing. This is not subjective. This is based on the tap test, how many times you can tap your 2 fingers in 10 seconds. Over 30 days, those people who were the Stamets stackers had an increase in the tapping ability from like 46 to 63 taps in 10 seconds. This is a psychomotor demonstration of a neurological benefit. This is not subjective. This is not like a depression and anxiety. This is like in a sense a controlled experiment. Not controlled in the exact ingredients, by the way. That's interesting, so the signal may actually be stronger. But there's only one chance in 250 that this is due to being random. And then these two articles recently came out that showed that antidepressant medicines work because they dock with attract B receptors that code for BDNF, brain neurotropic factors, that stimulate new neurons to be born. And yet, psychedelics bond to these receptors 1,000 times more than SSRIs. So why wouldn't microdosing work at these macrodoses? You know, it's going to be better than one, less than 1,000 at a microdose, but certainly it's going to be in there. And then Joel Siegel's article also found a generation of new neurons, neuroplasticity, new neural networks. So the proposed theory here is that niacin, being a vasodilator, neuropathy is oftentimes going to constriction of the blood vessels. And so the idea is whether vasodilation is to deliver more of the neurogenic properties of psilocybin and lion's mane. And I'll finish up in 1 minute here. So a preferred method is with chocolates. When I was doing a trip with my lover, and I first ate the mushrooms, I started gagging. And she goes, "What are you doing?" And I go, "These taste terrible." You know, and she goes, "But you're a psilocybin expert." I go, "No, but I like psilocybin mushrooms, but I don't like eating them." But you put them in chocolate, thanks to the Aztecs, they're delicious. So, you know, some people like them, other people don't. So the hypothesis here is psilocybin mushrooms revitalize our neural networks. Psilocybin mushrooms can increase intelligence, and I believe psilocybin mushrooms make us nicer people. So, we need more Albert Einsteins. We need more geniuses. I believe psilocybin is the genius molecule. I believe humans can invent new ways of living, new strategies to overcome the adversity. I believe that psilocybin mushrooms network cultures together. The long lineage that we share, the lineage into the future. The lineage, I believe, in the multiverse, in the mycoverse. I believe we're not part of a singularity movement. We're part of something that is spread throughout the cosmos. This is our time, sabios, knowledge keepers, to move forward with kindness, courage, forgiveness, random acts of kindness. We can do this. We have an obligation to do this. Let's not create a circular firing squad and shoot each other. Let's work collaboratively. Let's honor the ancient indigenous traditions while also providing modern technology to make those traditions better survive and learn from them, to recreate new traditions. I want to thank my research team. I want to thank Roland Griffiths. Please go to mushroomreference.com. And I want to thank all of you. This is a civil rights movement for the freedom of consciousness. Thank you very much.